Welcome everyone to Gardening for Life, Native Plants in Country and City Landscapes. I'm Maryann from the country, and later you'll meet Elsbeth from the city. A few things before we begin. We will be using common names of plants, but we'll list the scientific names in italics, which are most accurate if you're interested in finding the exact plant, should you be looking for it. And these are photos taken from our yard. And so just keep that in mind as you see the photos. We have some resources to share. So suggestions on where you can buy native plants and a couple of articles. If you're interested in receiving them, type your email address in the chat box. And also, if you have any questions, type them into the chat box as well. We'll have time for questions at the conclusion of our presentation. So let's begin with a midrash. When God created the first man, he took him and showed him all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And everything I created it for you. Be careful not to spoil or destroy my world. For if you do, there will be nobody after you to repair it for you." What I understand from this midrash is that we're stewards of creation. How we treat it has implications for future generations. And if creation disappears, so do humans. We are inextricably connected to the natural world. It is our home, providing us with all we need for survival, and we should be mindful that its resources are not limitless. And Alan, may I just ask, did you start the recording? Okay, great. I've been taking photographs of the life in our yard for some time. I often garden with my binoculars and camera nearby. There is just so much going on if you pay attention, and it's a thrill when I discover something I've never noticed before. The intricacies and interactions of the natural world are astounding and a delight to observe. Experiencing this is a big motivation for my gardening with native plants. And this is a red-bellied woodpecker on a sweet bay magnolia. So it's important. What is a native plant? It's a plant that is a part of the balance of nature that has developed over thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. Only plants found in this country prior to European settlement are considered native. So we live in Pennsylvania, which is classified as eastern deciduous forest. But obviously we live here, we've cleared the forest for our homes, for development, for farming. So we maintain unforested spaces. So in maintaining native landscapes, we make use of plants from anywhere in North America. So our concept of native plants is any plant that would live in North America, but that can adapt to our soil and our climate. I have to share with you two these are Pennsylvania woodland plants that I love, that I remember from my childhood walking in the woods with my sisters and my mom. And Jack in the pulpit grows in the woods around our house, mainly because the deer don't like it. And I have planted May apples. Now, first time to use my cursor, Alan. Oh, we didn't engage that. Can you see my cursor? Give me a thumbs up. The ones I'm circling are the May apples there in the back. They look like umbrellas, but they usually grow in colonies, so you'll see a lot of them together. So native plants and insects share an evolutionary story. It goes like this. Plants need insects for pollination. Insects need plants for the egg and larvae stages of development. Both need to survive. So what is palatable for some insects is deadly to others. So different insects have adapted to different plants. That's how you end up with these specialist relationships. These specialist relationships allow for a diversity of plants to satisfy a large variety of insect species. Plants serve as hosts to different species of insects. Without their host plants, insect species could disappear. And this is a monarch caterpillar munching on a butterfly weed. Nearly all bird species depend on caterpillars to feed their young. This is hard to believe, but about 6,000 caterpillars are required for one clutch of chickadees. Bird populations are used as an overall indicator of ecosystem health, and bird populations are in decline. By planting host plants, you'll have caterpillars, and if you have caterpillars, you'll have birds in your yard. Here's some examples of birds in our yard. The monarch butterfly is the poster child for the native plant movement. There are different species of milkweed, and any plant in the Asclepias family, which is this butterfly weed on the left, will serve as host, in the Asclepias genus will serve as host to the monarch. This is the only picture I have of a caterpillar. So going forward, I do want to point out some butterflies that I have photos of. Here we go. Because once they reach the adult stage, these butterflies and other pollinators require food from a large variety of blooming plants. So here's a fritillary butterfly it's on a purple coneflower, but the hosts are native violets. And I love this clear-winged hummingbird moth. And it's native honeysuckle and viburnum are hosts to that in the caterpillar stage. And this one you probably all know. And this is what's great about these photos. And I hope you can see this, but on the picture on the left, do you see the proboscis all curled up? And then look over here, it's extended down into the coneflower. I just love stuff like that. So much of what I've learned comes from the work of Doug Tallamy, and he has become quite well known and respected in his field of wildlife ecology. His books are engaging and compelling, and I highly recommend them. He works to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how these interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. All right, so there's not enough time for this, nor is it our focus, but I do not want to ignore this topic either. Our ecosystem is under threat from loss of habitat, from development, maybe we're at our limits with development, invasive plant species that displace natives, especially on developed or disrupted land, and create monocultures of plants that provide little or nothing to local wildlife. And then deer pressure. Deer love native plants and will eat them till they are gone. The effects of climate change add increased pressure on plants and animals who can adapt to rapidly changing climate. So our traditional view of gardening has been to treat plants as if they were primarily ornaments and ornamental, and to consider second, or sometimes not at all, their ecological roles. Our home gardens are part of a greater landscape, and using native plants can mitigate some of these pressures on our ecosystem by providing habitat for wildlife. So here's some things we did. And one was to remove some lawn and replace the area with native plants. Alan appreciates that there is less to mow, and since the plants grow together in communities, we don't need much mulch. We did initially, but not once the flowers grew together. Native plants do very well on low nutrient soil. Our soil is what they know, so fertilizer isn't necessary. Here's the other side of the fall, about the same time of the year. Different insects arrive on the scene at different times of the growing season. So blooming plants need to be available from April through October. Now, again, I want you to just, the reason these aren't the greatest photos, but look, can you see the pollen on the legs of this bee here? And then over here, it's a little out of focus, but can you see the hanging pollen? I love bees. All right, so my first story, this is, now you're going to see blooms, but you're also going to see some little stories along the way. And I was in my yard early in the spring, it was March 30th, and I was cleaning up the leaf litter around the house when I saw this. It took me a moment to see that it was some sort of insect. So I dashed into my house, got my camera, and shortly after snapping the photo, this happened. Turns out it's a comma butterfly. Who knew? Named for the comma on the leaf side of its wing. Let me see if I can. It's like that little white line right there. Do you see that? Yeah. Well, here's the crazy thing. There's a question mark butterfly too. Look it up. So if you wait till spring to clean up your garden beds, sleeping butterflies and other creatures will thank you. So spring bloomers, this is my part shade garden. These are mostly PA natives. Most bloom in the spring when the sun is not as intense. Jacob's ladder especially retains nice foliage through the summer. Now you learned Jack in a Pulpit. Can you spot it here? Oh, actually it's hidden because of these people here. You guys here. Oops. Do you see it over? It's right here. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, great. Because I'm not. And here's another one I love. Uvularia is one of my favorites and an early bloomer. And I love the gently hanging yellow flowers that don't scream out for attention. And then there's this beautiful, here it is in the garden, lime green foliage that lasts through the season if it's in the shade. Two nice ground covers that maintain wonderful foliage are Tiarella, which is blooming on the left of the foam flower. Tiarella right here, it's the white, you can see a little bit of it. This is a picture from a while back and it's really filled in now. You can see it up here in the right in the fall. So see how beautiful that ground cover is still to this, as late as right now. And then crested iris does well in sun or shade, and that also maintains nice green foliage through the season. Crested iris is planted around the KI signs. Wild columbine is good at finding the nooks and crannies in the garden, and the plants don't always stay where you plant them, but it's actually a fun feature to see where it might turn up next year. See it here in April, and then on the right in September. Moving into early summer, a burst of color begins in June. And this is back to our meadow. These are meadow-like garden. I call the red monarda my Dr. Seuss plants. The yellow sundrops you see down there are planted around the KI signs. And also around the signs are 3 different species of the beard tongue, which is the white up at the top. It's actually on its way out. That's like the first one to bloom. And the bee balm, that's also around the signs, I think. No, yes, a different species. I think it's a different color. By the way, most of the plants I'm showing you are deer resistant. Nothing is deer proof, but deer resistant. Here's another picture of the monarda, which I love, and the butterfly weed. And if you look in the front here, these right here, do you see this? This is a developing coneflower, which you might know. They'll be blooming a little later. They come out in August. Here's the garden phlox again with that hummingbird moth, and it's a mimicry to fool the dragonflies and birds who prey upon them. There are many different species of phlox with different colors, heights, and sun needs. The commonality of the genus is in the flower. If you look at one of the little flowers, you can count, or you can spell out phlox, P-H-L-O-X. It's a little way that we can identify it. There's an invasive plant that looks much like it, but it only has four petals. Here's a native vine. I love the way the trumpets open up. Do you see that? They're closed and then they open up. Do you see the little bee in one of the open trumpets down there at the bottom? Like a little sweat bee. I don't know my bees very well, but this is a burst of blooms in June. It will also bloom less intensely, especially if you cut off the dead blooms through the season. This photo was taken in July. Clethra in white, it comes in white and in larger sizes, and this is the dwarf size, getting to about 3 or 4 feet tall and wide. It's generally woody shrubs and trees are host to many more insect species than herbaceous plants. An oak tree supports over 500 species of moths and butterflies. Late summer into fall, many of the late summer flowers have bloom periods that extend into the fall. What I love about lobelia is that once the blooming appears, the blooms continue up the stalks as it grows. Lobelia can really spread and move around in your yard, at least in mine, but it is easily pulled out. And here I'm going to show you, you can see here how the blooms at the bottom here, down here, they're dying, but they continue to bloom and bloom and bloom and bloom. And these are blooms yet to come up here. And then there are, of course, the black-eyed Susans. All right, so here's another little story, a little fun thing. Meadow, this is a meadow photo in late summer. And look closely at the seed heads of the prairie coneflower up here at the top. Do you see how some of them are still all filled with pollen and nectar and then others are cleared off? That's the work of the bees. Do you see something else hiding in this photo? Do you have good eyes? Can you see what's hidden in this picture? A dragonfly. And the small bee or fly, I can't really tell up here on the coneflower, perhaps soon to be eaten by the dragonfly. I shared this because of the liatris. I didn't have a great picture, but it's in out of focus in the back there, and it's very well mannered and stays where you put it. And here's another species of it's a cultivar of coneflowers. The gentian on the left has a closed flower head. I don't know if you can see that, kind of like the trumpet vine. Watch the bee on the next series of slides work to get to the pollen and nectar. Okay, do you see the bee? All right, watch. Whoops. I wished I had that as a video, but I just marvel at how hard that bee will work. I figure it must be great pollen. I love when October comes because it brings the asters. There are many species of asters. They pair beautifully with goldenrod, not in this photo. Asters and goldenrod serve as host plant to many insects. They are superstars among native plants. And these species there are 3 species of asters and 2 species of goldenrod planted around the KI signs. Now, if you want to avoid this, let your plants feed the birds too. We're getting past insects now. Let's look at what birds can get from our plants. If you have some old trees, less garden cleanup is better for you and for wildlife. If you have an area where you have a dying or dead tree, and it's safe to allow it to stand, birds will love the food source and you'll be entertained by them as well. I wait till spring to cut back many of the seed heads of many of my blooming plants. Goldfinches and other birds love the seed in the heads of these flowers. And also the liatris, they stand like this and provide food for birds. A spice bush has seeds. This grows in the wild. The deer avoid it due to its spicy scent on the leaves, and birds love the berries. Has a nice yellow foliage, and it's host to the spice bush swallowtail, which is like the yellow one that you saw earlier, but it's black. This magnolia, this sweet bay magnolia, is one of my favorites, planted around the KI sign, that tree you'll see when you go by. It's aromatic blooms in the spring that develop into these cool looking compound seed heads. Birds and chipmunks descend on it in late summer, hang around until all the seeds are gone by fall. And this is a dwarf variety of winterberry holly. I have 3 of them out front. There are winter berries, or excuse me, the winter berries are eaten before the winter actually arrives. They're small bushes. But we have one in the backyard that looks like this through the winter. And so it's always, you can see lots of birds sitting in it. It doesn't always, it's another story, but it doesn't always get berries every year, and that's for another time. I'm sharing this picture. It's not the greatest, but Elsbeth has it has the same plant in the spring, so you'll see the blooms. And here in the fall, though, it gets this really beautiful magenta color. And then the flower heads still look cool all through the winter. They hang on till spring, till you cut them down in the spring. The understory trees are wonderful. Here's a serviceberry shadbush. It gets berries, blooms in the spring, berries that hang on till the birds eat them. And it's actually, people can eat them too, although we've never tried. And then this was just taken like 2 days ago. It's our sweet bag magnolia, that same tree that you've seen earlier here. And the trumpet vine is still, do you see a few red blossoms hanging on here in November? So, you know, just a couple, but they're there and it's fun to see them. So next, the rest of my slides are really just some, how are we doing on time? Oh, good, I'm fine. Most of my pictures are pretty, like, you know, micro, like zooming in. So I wanted to just show you some general pictures around our yard to give you a better sense of our space. The grasses, they're not native grasses, but they're wonderful. All grasses can show, and some are invasive, but this one isn't. And what's nice about them is that they will stay that lovely straw color and add some interest to your beds in the winter. And then in the back here by the lamppost, these are Fothergill, which is a lovely shrub. It gets white blooms in the spring and wonderful fall color. It's just a great shrub. Here's a little garden path that we have along the side of our house. I plant ferns here and heuchera. Another little path. This is a plant I think Elsa's is going to be showing you called Amsonia. And here another path, and these are red chokeberries that have flowers in the spring, berries through the summer and into the fall. And one thing that I think is interesting is that, you know, you don't have to have flower bloom to have interest. You can look at texture, shape, color of the green, different shades of green. And when you really take a look and study things, it doesn't always have to be about the screaming flowers, although those are beautiful too. And here's your drive out our drive. This is what we see when we leave. And that's my last slide. So I am ready to pass this off to Elsbeth. Now let's see. So thanks everybody for listening. And I'm going to stop sharing. There we go. Elsbeth? Good time for a bathroom break.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a couple minutes so that I can get keyed up here.
Your second cup of coffee.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just have to try to remember.
That's you. Hit the right button.
Your screen sharing, it says.
So can they bring up the list now? That's good. I can see it.
Can you see my screen? Yeah. Okay.
You're on.
Okay, great. Let me just get queued up here. Okay. Okay. So
People are away. What? You sent people away. So do you want
yeah, should we wait a couple minutes or are people back? I
Well,
can't.
Let me see.
I'm just scrolling through here.
Your cat, my dog.
Okay, I think we'll just go.
Yeah.
That's all right. Sounds good to everybody. So welcome. I'm the city gardener versus Maryann's country gardener. We live in the west end of Allentown at 27th and Allen. So we have a much smaller yard, and it's different because obviously we have a front yard that we have to keep in mind how all of our neighbors feel about what we plant out there. So I can't really put things like a vegetable garden out in the front. And we do have to mow our lawn. And I actually saw a house over in Meadowbrook where they had completely planted their front yard as a meadow with a big sign that says something along the lines of we are trying to feed all of our pollinators and hope that our neighbors are happy with the way we've done this. So it's kind of interesting to see that. So I'm going to start with, this is kind of a little video of our backyard, which I will start to play real quickly. You'll see how small our yard is and how it's planted, and I'll go through this all with you when we're finished with this short video. So this is kind of coming into our courtyard, and I have potted plants here. I also have herbs on the steps coming around. This is our screen porch and some of the plants that we'll talk about in a little bit, and bird feeders and my garden cart. Now, why am I not? There we go. So first slide I have is, again, coming down where we just came through is that's our backyard. You can see our neighbor's fence, and our neighbors were right next door. And in here we have a number of different things. I have garden phlox. The Amsonia that Maryann had referenced earlier is down here in this corner. There's a coneflower. You know, I can't see this either because I have everybody here. Let's see if there we go. The coneflower is right here, this red plant right there. Heuchera, which Maryann also mentioned, these are 3 heuchera that are right here. There is a baptisia in the back as well as one here. And then we have some other things here that are not native. The hydrangea, this hydrangea right here is not native. A sedum right here, and mint, which you have to be really careful with because if you don't, it will take over your garden. Then these are the garden phlox or the white phlox right here. And when I plant my garden, when I think about what I'm going to put in my garden, I have a pretty informal approach. Some gardeners say, I need to find this plant for this space. I'm more of the kind of person who goes and finds a plant at a store or at a nursery and says, okay, I'm just gonna have to find a place to put it. But I'm always taking into consideration things like water, the amount of water that an area gets, sun, the amount of sun, texture of a flower, height, color, to some extent color. I don't really take that into consideration as much, and bloom time. So I make sure that I've got something blooming in the garden from April through, well, actually through November. We're still having some things that are blooming now. My garden is small and it's easy to manage. And that's actually one of the things that I like about it, because I want to make sure, I tend to be a little, I'm going to say obsessive, that might not be the right word, but about making sure that things are neat. It's just kind of my nature. And during April and May, we're out in the yard pretty much every weekend, getting things cleaned up, moved around, planting new plants. And then after that, it's about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 10 hours a week. It really starts to fall off as things really start to bloom. Why is that not?
It's down.
Hold on a minute, guys. I'm having trouble moving my slide. Can I try that?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. So here's our back porch. We have a screen porch in the backyard, and which we use almost all the time. We love it out there. And I've got a bunch of different plants growing here. So the yellow one in the back is called Ligularia or ragwort flower, but it is not the same toxic pasture weed that's also called ragwort. It is also not native. If you see an asterisk there, what that means is that it is not a native. I try to use natives as much as I can, but sometimes I just need to plant some other plants, whether it's because I really like them or because I can't find a native plant that works well in a particular spot. But I never use invasive. So things like burning bush or butterfly bush, which is not the same as what Maryann was talking about. She was talking about butterfly weed, but they are invasive and I do not use those ever. But in this picture, so here's the Ligularia here. Here's the purple coneflower, the echinacea. This one is called Rattlesnake Master, and it's really cool. It's got a very, it looks almost like a thistle kind of thing. It's very sharp and pointy, but I love it. I think it's a really interesting plant. I also have a dahlia planted here. You can see that. So again, obviously not native. They won't even last through the winter. And so what I do is I plant the tubers in a pot around April 1st so that they are big enough come Mother's Day, which is the time of year that we can put out annuals without fear of frost for the most part. Although last year we did have frost after Mother's Day. But if I pot them on April 1st and plant them mid-May, then I will get flowers from them earlier rather than just putting the tuber in the soil after Mother's Day. And this tree, it's a small tree called Harry Lauder's walking stick, which is, you can't see it now with all the foliage on, but when it drops the foliage, it has a very contorted sort of configuration, and it's really interesting to look at in the wintertime. Oh, and this is the oak leaf hydrangea that Maryann was talking about earlier. So here's the oak leaf hydrangea in the middle of the summer, and it has these really beautiful white flowers. And then I just took this picture yesterday because I thought the color was so pretty. It's going to turn more and more like that color on the right, the bright orange and pink and red. I love oak leaf hydrangea. I think they're really beautiful plants. They grow really well, and they're just interesting and take up a great amount of space to frame out, especially our screen porch there. So this is again in the backyard, and this back here is a different kind of rudbeckia. You know, there's the classic black-eyed Susan. This is a little different. It's called thin leaf coneflower, and then these are swamp rose mallow or hibiscus. This is a perennial hibiscus, and it is native. And you will see in nurseries the really bright, vivid colored hibiscus. Those are not native and won't even make it through the winter here if you don't bring them inside. And then down here is milkweed. This is the Asclepias. This is the monarch butterfly caterpillars love this and will spend a lot of time with that, as well as the butterflies come to those too. So here is another picture. Here you can actually see this is a black swallowtail butterfly on, this is phlox. This is the hydrangea, the non-native, and then there's the coneflower up here. Maryann talked a lot about the phlox. I love this one. This is called David's phlox. And I love the color, the white color of it. And I use a lot of white in my garden just to highlight different spots. This is the native honeysuckle. Maryann also talked about this. She had up close. This is a further photo. Again, these are the trumpet flower on this is really beautiful. This is a native honeysuckle and is not invasive. The ones that are invasive, the yellow ones, that's a Japanese honeysuckle, and it is highly invasive, but it also is the one that has the fragrance. So I don't know if any of you have ever ridden a bike down a country road and suddenly you're engulfed in that lovely, lovely fragrance. The native doesn't have that, but it's not invasive. So that's probably more important. This is another little sitting area that we have in our backyard, and a combination of native and perennials, and actually have a couple of annuals in here too. So the natives are this Amsonia right here. I have a lot of wild ginger back here, which is also native. There's some phlox over here, and then a rhododendron back here. The perennials, there's a tree peony right here. I have another picture of it later. The allium, which I love, although they are not native, but I do really love them. I think they're really pretty. I have some hosta back here and some grasses as well right there. And then the annuals, this is a mandevilla, and where's the other? Oh, the dahlia right here. Again, I talked a little bit about that before. I talked earlier, combination of texture, color, height. Here is, this is called sea holly. Again, I really love the texture of this. It's got this gorgeous blue color, and then it sort of fades to a white, pales out a little bit. This is tall anemone. This is a native. Some of you may have seen a flashier sort of version of anemone, but this is the native, and I really think that these white flowers are very pretty. Joe Pye weed, I'll have more pictures of that later. I have a good bit of Joe Pye weed. They produce these gorgeous blooms and that last throughout the year. Thing about Joe Pye weed is it will get very tall. It can get to be, 8 feet tall. And then the weight of the blooms makes it fall over. So usually right around 4th of July, I pinch them back to about 3 feet so that they won't grow so big. These are daylilies. And then in here is just a little bit of salvia. Oh, here's the Joe Pye weed in bloom. So you can see how big the flower heads are. These are loved bees and butterflies and all different kinds of insects love these, and they just are all over them all summer long. So in the fall, I showed you the Amsonia a little bit earlier, but this is the Amsonia. I took this picture just a couple days ago, and you can start to see, I love this color. This is a purple beautyberry back here, and you can still see the purple berries on it here. The birds come in and just finish these off. This is almost finished now. But as Maryann said too, I try to keep as much of this kind of foliage up through the winter it provides cover for animals and for insects, and it provides an interest in your garden throughout the winter months. And it's just the mulch that it provides it's good for the soil. So there's a lot of different reasons. I used to kind of take everything down in the fall so that in the springtime wouldn't be as much work and you could just sort of start fresh. But I've changed that over the last couple of years to keep much more in the garden throughout the winter time. And then to keep the birds happy. So I've got, obviously I have a bird bath there, but this right here, this bluish is called hoary skullcap. That grows to be about 3 to 4 feet tall and is bees and insects love that. Here's the Joe Pye weed. This is a little earlier shot than what I just showed you. Back here is a limelight hydrangea tree, which is not native, but does provide a focal point in the garden. Here's the tree peony that we talked about before, and a balloon flower right here. Again, and I know Maryann mentioned this, but I try to plant in plant communities so that, when the first plants come up in like April, my garden looks pretty barren because they're just, and I keep looking at it and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got a hole here, I've got a hole there, I've got to fill all this. But by June, everything's grown in and it all grows together very closely so that it cuts back dramatically on the need for mulch. Here's another photo of the swamp rose mallow. I just think that's so pretty. I love the colors and the size. Those flowers are probably about 4 inches across. Here's St. John's wort, which I'm sure we've all heard of. I was at a garden store with a friend of mine, and there were a couple of these plants there and they weren't labeled. And I went to the person who owned the store and said, do you know what these are? And she said, no. So my friend and I said, you know what, let's just buy them and see what happens. So it ended up that it was St. John's wort. And this is something, it's used in alternative medicine for lots of different reasons. Hot flashes, skin wounds, and treating skin irritation. Here we have a photo of a praying mantis, and this was in our yard a couple of years ago. They have a very big appetite, and they really help farmers and gardeners by eating moths, mosquitoes, roaches, flies, and aphids, as well as small rodents in their fields and gardens. Just thought it was a really interesting, and the whole idea of beneficial insects is something that I've been looking at over the last couple of years. About, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I went out in the garden and I looked at, it was a bird's nest spruce that I had growing, and I looked at it and I thought that it was dying because it was really brown. And as I looked closer, I realized that it was covered with these small insects. And so I grabbed a can of Raid and I blasted them away. Having looked back on that and learned a little bit more, what would have been better would have been for me to, and I've done this since, is to start to plant plants that encourage beneficial insects like ladybugs, praying mantis, lots of different kinds of predator bees and wasps that will actually kill other insects, as a way to control that rather than using insecticides. I rarely use insecticides. I don't use fertilizer except for pots, because the more you use native plants, the less you have need for fertilizer, because they are adapted. They grew to adapt to our environment and our soil. Now this is the other side of our house. A couple of years ago, we had a lot of problems here with drainage on this side of the house. It was very wet over there. So last year we were talking about it, and I thought, well, why don't we try to put a rain barrel in to collect some of that water so it's not so wet? And that was really the original reason why we put the rain barrel in. It turns out that it's got 2 big benefits. The first, of course, is the drainage issue, but the second is that the rainwater that we use to water plants is much more beneficial. We've seen a difference in the way plants are growing from plants that have been watered with the rainwater. And another part of native plants and planting native plants is that you shouldn't have to water them, again, because they grew to adapt to our conditions here. So having as many native plants as possible really cuts down on watering. And let's see, in this photo, I've got a lot of different kinds of things growing here. So this is black-eyed Susans. This is Nepeta or catmint. This is the cone flower. Here's a cranesbill geranium down here. You can't, it's right here, but you can't quite see it. The goldenrod that Maryann was talking about, that's what all of this is right here. This is a 9-bark, which this is just about 2 years old. It really started to grow this year, but this will fill out and be really, it's beautiful. The color of the leaves is really pretty, and it turns really pretty color in the fall. And let's see. Yep, that covered that. And this is also over there. Let me see if I can go back. It's planted right back here, so you can't see it in that picture, but this is called golden ragwort. And it's really pretty, but it's a native, but it spreads really easily. So I'm constantly picking it out of the grass and other flower beds because it moves around really quickly. This is an Eastern red bud. We just planted this year. So I don't have this photo is not from my tree, it's from another tree in our neighborhood. But I love this Eastern red bud. And one of the things I love most about it is the way that when it blooms, you can see how the blossoms are right on the branch. They are not extended out. And you can see that a little bit in the background too. And they're really a beautiful color. And so that's one of the reasons why we planted it in here. We also have put in a number of natives around this bed. As I said, I've been moving towards that more and more. And then this is another plant I wanted to show you in our front yard. This is witch hazel. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the importance of planting things that bloom really early. So you can see this bee on the witch hazel. This photograph was taken on February 15th. So witch hazel blooms really early. This particular one, this Vernali one blooms, a lot of them also bloom in the fall, but this particular one blooms really early in the late winter, early spring. And here's the bee out on February 15th looking for pollen. So it's really important to think about that when you're planting. And then the other thing I love about it is this picture was taken a couple days ago and the color of it is just gorgeous. So it provides, it's a great plant year round. And then I love this quote, "The glory of gardening, hands in the dirt, head in the sun, heart with nature. To nurture a garden is to feed not just the body, but the soul." Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or?
I think that we have such a small group that we could maybe just open it up to conversation and just, if there is any, and if everyone is, try to be careful of not talking over each other, take turns if there's any comment. So Alan, is that something you have to do? Or Linda?
We do not. People can unmute
Oh,
themselves.
okay, so just go ahead and unmute.
Can I jump in?
Sure, sure.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I guess.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jan. I'm a newbie. And I also am a native gardener, and we are transforming a lot of our yard to meadow, little by little. I want to address the grass issue, the lawn issue. We had a whole area in the front of our house. Our house is set way, way, way back. And we started to transform it. And my husband, who also despises mowing, decided to try something called no-mow grass that we got from a company called American Meadows. It looks amazing. It's about 6 inches tall. It's very soft. It sort of droops over and it looks beautiful. It doesn't look unkempt at all. If anybody wants to come see it, it's in its glory. I can tell you where I live. You can email me.
We have your email. Actually,
Yes.
I'm interested.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to say, I am not a master gardener, but I aspire to be. And we have been planting very large quantities of plants, which is not affordable if you go to a nursery. So I established an account with a company that sells plugs, a wholesaler, so that you get like 50, 75 little tiny plants.
North Creek?
What's that?
North Creek? Is it North Creek?
It's not North Creek. It's Perennial Market.
Oh, okay. I don't know that.
And I would be very happy to share a large quantity of plants among several people if folks want to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I personally could be. Jan, we have your email, right? And we'll recognize.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I might share that in our group email when I
Sure.
think it looked like I got everybody's email, so I can
Sure.
add that you're a person who wants to share resources. And I know because I like the North Creek, you can get, trays of plugs for really cheap, but you have to buy 50 of them,
Right.
So that's problematic. I mean, they are
Yeah.
small. You might want 10, but so
Right.
it can work
Exactly.
with the people.
Well, it worked for me because we're also planning a memorial garden for a cousin in a very large area. So I was able to, split those. But I do have a question. I have a very burning question about Monarda and phlox as well. I've planted both in the past and had really bad problems with mildew.
Mhm.
And I know that, you know, they need airspace, and I think there's certain cultivars that are more that are better than others. But what direction would you guide me? And
Elsbeth,
what advice?
I know what you're saying, Jan. And I've had some years where mildew has been a big problem and other years where it hasn't been. I've had a lot of luck with white box, the David. I have not had any mildew with that one. And I've also, I think that thinning it out has made a big difference and trying to get a little bit more air. Yeah.
I think, is it in a really sunny spot? Because that also can help if it's part sun. I know out at the meadow it's better, but around the side of the house it's not. So I don't treat it in any way. But I know what you're saying. Sometimes I thin it out. I take some out and put them in the house to enjoy. And you know, Doug telling me one of the things he says, if you know, when something in your garden, I'm a little bit not like Elsbeth, like a messy garden, I just sort of have to be by the virtue of how big it is. I'd be out there all the time. And so, and I think it sounds like Elsbeth may put more hours in than I do in the garden. I would just say that he would always say, well, just take a few steps back and then admire your garden, you know. So it's sort of what you can tolerate. I don't think there's any harm to the plant.
It's just unsightly.
Well, you know, I don't have any quick answers. There might be some sort of herbicide or something, but
I tried.
I don't usually look for that.
I tried some natural product and I can't remember what it is now. And it's made a difference for a little while. I might have had to reapply it and I didn't. You know, there's only so much a person can do, right?
Right.
And that's when I do tend to cut back because Monarda keeps coming up and it goes everywhere. So I'll cut those down a little bit. So anyway.
Good advice.
So Maryann and Elsbeth, on behalf of Women of KI, we want to thank you very much for.
I have 2 questions.
I'm not ending it. I just wanted to get it in there before we all blipped away.
And everyone,
I just want to thank both of you for taking the time and energy and the enthusiasm to put this together for us. And I took lots of notes, so you know, I may, you know, be asking questions in the future. But thank you very much. Just, you know, this is like the perfect time to do this. It's fun. So thank you for giving us some inspiration and some happiness and, you know, some moments of joy. So in this crazy time. So thank you both very much.
welcome.
And Alan too, and Marty for helping.
Yeah.
And Linda.
It was a great project for me to get lost into in the last few weeks. I could just, you know, I spent hours on it when I wouldn't have really needed to. I kept doing new things. And
well, and it's fun for us to be able to show our gardens as well. You know, it's not, nobody came to visit this year, so.
Sharon?
Have you two ever been part of, you know, garden tours? Have your house, you know, house has been on a garden tour?
I've been asked to do it, but again, kind of going back to my nature, it was more of a stressor for me than I wanted it to be, because my next door neighbor, who has an incredible garden, I saw her out there one night in the dark the day before a garden tour. And I thought, you know what, I can't do that. This is supposed to be fun for me. It's not supposed to be stress. It's supposed to be therapy. So I declined.
Right. Yeah.
So that's my answer.
And I've never been asked, but I will tell you that among master gardeners, we have that kind of thing going on. And initially I was like, oh, mine isn't always beautiful every moment of the year. And I'm not sure I can do this, all this self-doubt about it. But now I sort of feel like, hey, it's a work in progress and life is messy. And my garden reflects a lot of it's such a metaphor for me so many times. You know, it's messy and it's beautiful and things are dying, things are growing. It's just, I don't know. I've gotten much more laid back about how it fits into my life.
Well, you all need to start your own garden tour, like, the messy garden tour or something, or have
That's right.
if AI do it eventually, or something.
And with the focus for me being on, oh, what birds can I get into my yard? And I don't really care so much if it's picture perfect looking all the time. And I know that the animals love it when they can hide in the mess here and there in my yard. And it's less work. I'm a fair weather gardener, so.
Yeah, and some of the people on the garden tours, have professionals
Yes.
on it for hours and hours before the tour. Yeah, because I've been on it, so yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. It's amazing, really.
And I will come back full circle to preservation of our.
from Lehighton, PA.
And so I just keep coming back to the fact that I have a lot of invasive species still on our 2 acres. We live out in Center Valley. I didn't mention that before, but I have invasive species that I have yet to get rid of totally. And then, then there's a new one. The stiltgrass is just taking over. So I've got that I never really want to deal with it, but I really need to. And so that's pulling at me in terms of the time. But that's important. So.
Well, the
Anybody?
garden tour wasn't really my question. If I can do my questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's good to talk back and forth. Kind of going along with what we're saying, a garden tour. I had the idea Women of KI should do like a plant exchange at some point. Like I have gardens and I have a vegetable garden and stuff, but with the flowers and plants, like, the perennials that you need to divide, when it's time to divide them, I hate to throw them away. And I'll put on Facebook, does anyone want them? So I feel like I need a bigger network sometimes.
Well, that's a great
come and
idea.
get this.
Great idea.
Great
Suzanne
idea.
Katz did that years ago.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
She would have,
Maybe we can start a little network. I have to put a plug in. If any of you are ever on the Saucon Rail Trail at the Reading Drive Trailhead, a group of us working with the oversight committee of the rail trail took a field of it wasn't a field, but a large area of what was stilt grass, and we just cardboarded it, put down mulch and compost, and back in 2014, and planted native plants. And it looks pretty good. It's not like, again, it's not like we'd win a garden tour, but you should see, we had so many different caterpillars there. I wish times I would have had my camera, but there's so much life happening there in the summertime. It doesn't always look beautiful, but there's always something going on. And we allowed this year, because we couldn't really get down there that much with a group of people, the weediest of the Asclepias. And I know it's a bad name for it to be called a weed, but it's I forget what it's called. Elsbeth, I don't know if you know which Asclepias it is, but it's the one along the roads. It's not that attractive. It has these underground, well, it is kind of, it has pretty pink flowers that get tall. And they're underground network of roots where it just kind of spreads out. It gets usually mowed down before it can do anything along the side of the road, or gets hit with pesticides out in the fields for crop growing. We had a lot of it coming up this year, and it had more monarch caterpillars on than I have ever seen on any Asclepias. And it's this, it was just incredible. So anyway, that's there. So take a look right near the Porta Johns.
my last question is the asters you talked about. I have those, and they're usually like really leggy. The stalk gets all brown and you have like a little bit at the top. Are you supposed to pinch them back?
I think you are supposed to. I never do, because I kind of like the way they sort of sprawl over our sidewalk, and I like that. But yeah, you are supposed to pinch them back.
Because actually mine are doing better now. The tree that was near it, a service berry, was not doing well. So I actually had Bartlett tree, fertilize it and spray it and stuff, because it was really looked awful. And it was losing its leaves like way like in the summer, way before fall. So with the fertilization they did and everything, like the perennials around that tree look much better. So the fertilization seemed to help. So even though you're not supposed to fertilize
Well,
a
you're
native plant, it helped a little bit.
Not that you're not supposed to, it's just that it shouldn't necessarily, but you know, plants are finicky and sometimes they do well and sometimes, and I know there's a species of the amelanchier, the serviceberry, that does better, and I planted one this year, so it's still, jury's still out on whether or not it has leaf retention better than this. I don't know what species you have, but we can talk. And I found that we'll see if that's true, but anyway.
Yeah, and you know, there are no rules really. I mean, it's really important to just kind of relax with it and go along with what your garden's doing. You know, every year, like one year, one plant will do spectacularly well, and then the other one won't. And it's just like that. It is nature. And so when it comes to things like fertilizing, or whether it is a native or it's not, I try to just kind of go with the flow a little bit and enjoy it. And the other important rule is if it's not working and you don't want it there, don't be afraid to rip it out. I always was so hesitant to rip out a plant. It's like, oh my God, you know, what am I going to do with it? And how can I kill this plant? But you have to just, sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind.
And then the thing is diversity. Like Elsbeth said, if something's not growing, something else is. So if you have a diversity of plants at different times of the year, then something's going to look good.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Great.
Well, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was very enjoyable.
Beautiful.
Good.
Yeah, well, get outside and enjoy. See if you can find something in bloom or something interesting, or I don't know, a lot of creatures are going to sleep about now, but
But with global warming, you know, it's not as bad to be outside nowadays, you know.
And it's not too late to plant. Thank you for the new ideas on some of the plants to put in our garden.
yeah, well, we'll be in touch by email and give you Jan's contact. Jan, are you involved with the Unitarian Church? You're in Bethlehem. Where are you, Jan?
You're muted.
Another
I'm
time.
in Center Valley as
Oh,
well.
you're my neighbor. Okay. we'll
Yeah,
talk. Okay, great.
please email
Let's
me.
change. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, all. Great
Bye-bye.
program.